The silence in that modest wooden tea house centuries ago carried a different weight. Soft, deliberate, curling around you like the faint smoke drifting from grilled fish in the kitchen, mixing with the lingering incense, barely bold enough to mask it. You lay on the thin futon beneath you, the firmness reminding you how far you were from anything resembling modern comfort. No plush pillows here, just the quiet insistence of tradition pressing into your spine. Outside, the corridor stretched like a narrow ribbon of stillness, broken only by the familiar clack of wooden geta sandals. Each step a metronome marking the rhythm of centuries-old rhythms. Sliding paper doors whispered closed as maids swished silk sleeves, cleaning with patient precision, their motions a silent dance caught in an endless loop. Somewhere near, a bamboo fan was polished with a soft scrape that slipped into the quiet like the fading notes of a distant temple bell. The air was thick with subtle scents, the gardenias blooming quietly just beyond the open windows, the smokiness of charcoal mingling with fragile hints of herbal poultices hidden away in whispered deliveries. You breathed it in slowly, feeling the moment settle like a soft shroud around you. Picture this: your only battery was the last ember slowly dying in a brazier, a far cry from the instant frustrations of a phone screen going dark. If now a brief outage maddens us, then waiting out the slow dimming of a single fire must have tried even the calmest hearts here. The courtesan's life often painted with elegant strokes of grace, and poise unfolded instead in deeply prescribed routines. You witnessed it all, the delicate handling of sliding doors, the measured breaths taken to soothe an aching belly, calm minds coaxed with subtle breathing exercises known only in murmurs. Pregnancy carved its own quiet narrative here, managed through secret herbal remedies, passed like fragile heirlooms between hushed conversations. In the pale light of that winter morning, a world seemed both vast and claustrophobic, the delicate rice paper screens filtering reality just enough to soften its sharpness. You could almost feel the tremor of unseen hands, the hidden tensions beneath every calm gesture. Temporarily, a faint warmth blossomed in the common room as a small group exchanged smiles, the kind of light rarely captured in historical pages. A brief reprieve from the rigid daily shuffle. A small fire flickered, casting lazy shadows on worn floorboards, and for a moment there was hope, a fragile ember in the slow clockwork of their days. Then something shifted. The rhythm faltered, subtle but undeniable. The constant gentle murmur of work and whispers hushed. The distant temple bells disappeared into the void, and even the canine calls ceased abruptly outside. A glance passed between neighboring rooms, eyes wide, silent questions left unspoken. You felt it too. The day was no longer the same. Hey, before Morpheus wraps you completely, make sure you're still subscribed. For some, the button went missing, and I'd hate for you to miss the next sleep stories. While you're at it, drop a soft like a pillow. Tell me down in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Your interaction keeps this quiet corner alive. Thanks for being part of the calm. The silence held a sudden tension now, thick as the layers of paper in the sliding doors that no one dared to move. Your breath, once a steady rhythm syncing with the world's pulse, caught slightly. Somewhere just beyond those fragile screens, the gardenias paused their bloom, or maybe it was your mind, framing the stillness as something more than mere quiet. You shifted just a fraction on the thin futon beneath you. The firmness was relentless, pressing up from the straw mat with a stubbornness that felt almost purposeful. In a day that suddenly felt off-kilter, comfort was a distant luxury someone had long ago forgotten. You wrapped your arms around yourself, feeling the subtle scratch of silk against skin, the faint scent of incense reluctantly fighting the sharpness of charcoal smoke. Outside, the corridor that had been a gentle metronome fell strangely mute. No soft clack of gaita sandals, no swish of silk sleeves methodically cleaning away yesterday's dust. Even the usual scrape of a bamboo fan polishing itself to a muted gleam hadn't started its familiar song. For a moment, the world felt paused, like a breath held underwater, the waiting unbearable yet impossible to break. Your ears strained for the hum of temple bells, those slow, mournful tones that usually drifted through like an ancient lullaby. But there was nothing. The absence was heavier than any sound. Somewhere close, a maid's eye flickered in a fleeting glance through the paper pane, just enough for you to see the wide, unblinking look that said more than any words could. The ritual dance of the teahouse had stuttered, a rhythm broken not by haste, but by an unspoken shared unease. You remembered the fragile beauty of earlier moments, the warm glow around the hearth, the faint heat pressing gently against cold skin, the brief respite that crackling fire offered as it fought back night's chill. That ember, once your only battery, might have been dimming even faster now. You wondered if anyone else felt the collapse of time, this strange tilt of calm into something darker. The air itself seemed heavier, saturated with the smell of drying herbs, of crushed bark and quiet secrets wrapped in paper parcels carefully passed from hand to hand. The poultices, once soothing, suddenly felt like talismans against an invisible threat. Then came a subtle shift, a twitch in the shadow of the corner, a faint shuffle that wasn't quite the measured step of a servant. It was almost imperceptible, but your sense sharpened. You knew when to listen, and this time your instincts whispered something urgent beneath the silence. One of the women, in a neighboring room, usually a portrait of composed grace, suddenly pressed her hand to her belly, the curve visible beneath her fine fabric, as if warding off a tremor you couldn't yet name. Pregnancy in this place was a delicate dance, balanced by ancient remedies and cautious breaths. It had seemed like a slow, sacred thread weaving through days, but now that thread felt strained, as though pulled taut by unseen fingers. You felt your own pulse quicken, the small comfort of ritual slipping away like smoke through a cracked window. The thin paper screen at the edge of the room rippled slightly, moved by a breath you couldn't see. A faint murmur started, a whisper, then a half-hearted cough, before the entire quiet shattered. Voices rose, hushed but frantic, like the rustle of dry leaves caught in a sudden wind. The women moved with an urgent grace, sliding doors opening and closing with sharper snaps, eyes darting like moths to a flame. But distant bark broke the silence outside, the sharp call of a dog, but it held no cheer anymore, only warning. The gardenia's scent was drowned beneath a new note, the sharp, metallic bite of fear threading through the once gentle air. You sat up slowly, every movement feeling heavier under the weight of eyes that no longer held calm. The room, once warm and flickering, now seemed narrower, pressing inward with shadows that stretched far beyond the hearth. For a brief moment, a young maid brushed past, carrying a tray of lacquered bowls dripping with hot tea, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was a fragile ember of normalcy amid the gathering storm. Outside, wind stirred the branches of the gardenia bush, their fragrance fragmented and fleeting, a last whisper before the storm. You breathed deeply, the taste of charcoal and herbs lingering on your tongue as the flickering fire guttered, its flame now a wavering ghost. The world outside. The teahouse felt suddenly distant, as if the air itself had turned cold and unwelcoming. Somewhere deep within the folds of stillness, you felt a shift, an unseen hand closing a door you hadn't even realized was open. You glanced toward the narrow corridor, now darkened even without the sun's retreat, the sliding doors lining it trembling slightly, as if caught in a breathless pause between moments. And then, barely audible but unmistakably clear to you, a faint, deliberate knock, slow, measured, 3 times. Not the soft tapping of polite visitors, but something else. Something that sent a shiver you hadn't expected, curling softly down your spine, settling like a secret whispered only to those who dared to listen. The night was waiting, and you knew, whatever that knock promised, it was only the beginning. The knock repeated, slow, deliberate, a rhythm that didn't belong to the gentle world you'd been wrapped in moments before. 3 steady beats, pressing insistently against the fragile veil of paper doors. The air thickened around you, the muted glow of the brazier, casting shadows that quivered with anticipation. You rose cautiously, the thin futon yielding reluctantly beneath your movements. Each breath tasted of smoke and crushed herbs, the faint bitterness clinging to your tongue. As you approached the sliding screen, fingers trembling just slightly, you eased the door open, just enough to peer beyond. Outside stood a figure, cloaked in darkness, the hem of their garment brushing quietly against the floor. The gardenias shuddered in the cold wind, petals trembling as though afraid to bloom under such a grim sky. No face met your gaze, only the shadow of the hooded stranger, still as a stone statue carved from night itself. Behind you, a soft rustle betrayed the presence of others. Women emerging from their rooms, eyes wide with silent alarm, yet resigned to whatever was to come. The temperature seemed to drop, the air slipping from a fragile warmth into the sharpness of ice, as if the world beyond this teahouse boundary had been replaced by something colder, less forgiving. The figure shifted, a slow movement that sent a ripple through the tranquility. A hand emerged briefly from the folds of fabric, revealing a delicate scroll bound with a thin strip of faded silk. It was held out with an unsettling grace, as if carrying a message that might fracture the very foundations of whatever fragile peace you had known here. You reached out, fingertips brushing the rough texture of the paper, feeling the brittle resistance beneath your touch. Apart from the wooden floorboards creaking faintly beneath your feet, the only sound was the sharp intake of breath from one of the older women, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the shadows. Unrolling the scroll, your eyes caught the delicate brushstrokes of ancient characters, their meaning coiled beneath layers of history and whispered secrets. It was a summons, a call to an assembly of the highest order, summoned by a name that sent a quiet shiver through your spine. The courtyard lay beyond, shrouded in mist that clung to the wooden beams and lanterns like a ghostly curtain. You imagined the cold mist curling through the bamboo grove, swallowing the footprints of those who might dare to answer the call. The promise of raw confrontation loomed, silent but heavy. Behind you, the women murmured softly, half prayers, half warnings. Their voices rose and fell like the ebb of distant tide, fragile enough to vanish with the wind. Yet in that fragile light, something fierce stirred. The embers in the hearth flickered in acknowledgement, pushing a brief pulse of warmth into the cold air. You folded the scroll carefully, the weight of its message pressing against your chest like an unseen hand. The courtyard awaited, and with it, the inexorable pull of the unknown. A sudden gust swept through the open windows, carrying with it the sharp scent of wet earth and raw rain, an ominous note. As if the sky itself mourned what was to come, you glanced once more at the darkened hallway, where the dancing shadows seemed to stretch and yawn, swallowing the light. Faces pressed against paper panes flickered in the dim reflections, some resolute, others trembling beneath the surface. Each one held a story, a lifetime folded into moments that now balanced on a knife's edge. As your fingers traced the edge of the scroll, your mind drifted to the moments just past, the slow dimming of the brazier's flame, the muted silence that had swallowed all signs of life like a tide pulling out to sea. That sacred stillness, once a balm, had turned into a whisper of warning, a soft echo of things better left unspoken. Outside, the distant temple bell tolled, not its usual mournful chime, but a fractured note that cracked the quiet as something unseen stirred in the shadows beyond. You felt the air grow heavier, laden with the weight of stories yet to be told, and in that fractured silence, your gaze caught the fleeting gleam of eyes watching from the dark, the hint of movement just beyond the edge of light, the kind of movement that promised the night held more than just shadows. You took a slow breath, the cold air filling your lungs like a challenge. The tea house, once a refuge suspended in time, had become a crossroads where past and present collided, a place where the fragile beauty of ritual met the raw pulse of unfolding destiny. Outside, the knock had ceased, but its echo lingered, an unfinished sentence carved deep in the wooden frame. And somewhere, just beyond the threshold, the night waited with bated breath, ready to reveal the story that must not be silenced. The paper door creaked open just enough for the faintest crack of moonlight to spill into the room, a silver thread in the darkening silence. Outside, the figure lingered like a shadow pulled taut against the night's fabric, its outline shifting ever so slightly with the restless breath of wind that seeped through cracks in the wooden lattice. The gardenias, once fragrant and soft, now bowed beneath the weight of the cold, their petals folding inward like secret messages withheld. You stepped forward, every movement a quiet negotiation with the thick air that clung to your skin like a damp kimono. The scroll rested heavy in your palm, its delicate paper whispering against your fingers, a fragile contrast to the gravity it carried. From behind you, the murmur of the women's voices wove a tight hum, threading through the stillness. Their breaths were measured, but carried the tremor of unspoken worries, as if the very walls held their anxiety, like a silent witness. The faint clatter of a lacquer bowl set down echoed somewhere, a heartbeat in the hush. The stranger's hand extended again, a silent invitation. The scroll's summons was clear, an assembly, not just any gathering, but one cloaked in secrecy and burdened with unyielding authority. The name inscribed was one you recognized too well, whispered among the corridors of power and fear, spoken in tones that went cold even on the warmest days. You hesitated, the thin futon's firmness pressing into your knees, as if reminding you of the precarious line between comfort and duty. Outside, the bamboo grove swayed with a mournful rustle. Moonlight flickered through the leaves, casting restless shadows like phantom dancers on the ground. The courtyard awaited, cold, empty, yet almost alive with anticipation. Wisps of fog wove between lanterns, wrapping wooden beams in a veil that seemed to blur the boundary between reality and something other. The faint clang of a distant bell fractured the night, but its tone was fractured, an imperfect echo that unsettled rather than soothed. You wrapped the silk robe tighter around your shoulders, the fabric whispering secrets of tradition and restraint. Your breath mingled with the chill air, plumes barely visible. As you crossed the threshold into the corridor, now darker and quieter than before. Each step was a soft tick against the worn floor, the faint scent of charcoal smoke trailing behind like a memory reluctant to fade. Doors, those fragile screens of rice paper, lined your path, their surfaces trembling ever so slightly to the rhythm of your cautious heartbeat. Peaks of wide eyes flickered within, faces pressed close, locked in silent vigil. The assembled women fell into a quiet procession, their footsteps light but resolute. Within the fragile beauty of their silk kimonos and subtle makeup lay a collective tension, born not just of fear, but of an ancient understanding. Some forces defy even the gentlest hands. At the courtyard's entrance, the air changed palpably. The faint warmth of the burned-out brazier was gone, replaced by a biting cold that reached beneath garments and history alike. You exhaled slowly, the breath crystallizing as a fleeting mist. The world seemed distilled into this moment of poised breath, waiting for a call that had come too late. The scroll slipped from your fingers, unfolding itself as if weighed by the significance etched in its ink. The assembly's summons was not merely protocol, but a prelude to upheaval. Rumors whispered of unrest stirring beyond these walls, fractures too subtle for casual glance, cracks that would soon threaten the foundation of their ordered existence. A soft sound caught your ear, a shuffle near the stone lanterns. You turned just in time to glimpse a figure slipping between shadows, their movement fluid and deliberate, as if the night itself had taken form. The eyes that caught yours reflected no candlelight, only depthless pools where meaning flickered briefly, then vanished like smoke. Time dissolved in that gaze, and the courtyard around you warped. No longer mere space, but a place where past and future conspired in silence. The gardenia's fading scent mingled with the metallic tang of impending rain, a bouquet unsettlingly heavy. Your hands clenched the scroll again. The message's weight mirrored the sudden constriction in your throat, the soft threat lying in those unrolled characters. Outside, the last notes of the temple bell tolled, breaking the penetrating quiet with a sharpness that felt like a fracture in some ancient ritual. Behind you, the women gathered closer, their murmurs now laced with a grin. Resolve. The fragile embers of hope, once kindled by laughter and flickering flames were now shadows stretched thin over the teahouse's wooden beams. You took a breath, steady but charged, as the soft knocking resumed. 3 deliberate beats, its origin unknown, its meaning unspoken. The sound threaded through the night air like a summons to a fate neither fully understood nor escapable. And then, a flicker, barely perceptible. The torn edge of a dark cloak slipped past the sliding door at the far end of the corridor. A presence, arriving unseen yet deeply felt, poised to tip the fragile balance. The night drew its breath, holding the quiet close, and you knew, with a certainty as cold as the mist curling around your feet, the story had begun its next chapter. This is over, and you rest until sleep. Shifting shadows lengthened as you stepped deeper into the courtyard, every footfall softened by the mist clutching the wooden planks beneath you. It felt as if the night itself exhaled with you, the air thickening into something palpable, a quiet warning etched in every breath. The scroll you still cradled was no longer just paper. It was a vessel of unspoken fate, its ancient ink a trace of mandates passed down through whispers and fear. Around you, the other women formed a murmuring congregation, their silken kimonos brushing the stones with an eerie grace, heavy with the weight of shared uncertainty. Their faces, lit by the hesitant glow of paper lanterns, flickered between resolve and the fragile trembling that betrayed the storm gathering inside. One older woman's lips moved silently, mouthing a prayer or perhaps a plea to gods unseen. A fragile chord amid the overwhelming quiet. A distant howl tore through the stillness, unhinged and raw, slicing the night's tentative calm like a shard of ice. You flinched, the sound vibrating against your chest in a way that unspooled the thin threads holding your own composure together. Somewhere beyond the bamboo grove, shadows shifted unnaturally. A reminder that the world outside this courtyard was no longer the slow, deliberate chamber you had known. Your gaze caught the delicate flowers of the gardenia, their once glossy leaves now dulled and bowed under the mist's weight, petals folding inward as though protecting some secret heart. Their scent, usually soft and sweet, was tainted by the sharp coolness of night, a bitter contrast to the smoky herbs still clinging faintly to the air, reminders of healing and fragility entwined. Suddenly, the scroll slipped from your hand, unfurling itself on the stone floor with a sound like a whispered sigh. You bent down, heart hammering quietly, to retrieve it, fingers brushing the fragile paper as a chill ran along your skin. The words you'd read before seemed to pulse with a new urgency, a call not just to gather, but to brace, to stand on a threshold that had nothing to do with the comfort of ritual or the reassuring crackle of firelight. A soft rustling grew near the edge of your vision. Turning sharply, you glimpsed a figure stepping from the arching shadows of a bamboo grove. Cloaked again in darkness, this silhouette moved with a silent confidence that unsettled the delicate stillness like a stone dropped into a still pond. Their form shifted just out of the reach of the lantern light, and you struggled to discern a face behind the hooded veil. The group around you stiffened, breaths held collectively as if drawn tight by the presence. A maid shifted closer, her whispered prayer lost in the thickening quiet. The figure raised a slender hand, revealing a small, lacquered box. Without a word, it was offered forward, the midnight surface gleaming faintly with a cold distance. The gesture was ceremonial, yet heavy, laden with expectation. Taking the box felt like agreeing to step through a threshold you hadn't realized was there. A silent contract written in shadows. Your fingers ached at the contact, cold and trembling, as though drawing energy from the object was something both vital and dangerous. Slowly, carefully, you pried the box open. Inside, nestled against worn silk lining, a single metal talisman glinted, etched with the same ancient characters that had scrolled across the summons. It felt impossibly heavy despite its size, as if it carried the burden of all whispered fears in the teahouse. From somewhere depths darker than the night came an unspoken message. Things were no longer governed by teahouse rules or the slow ticking of routine, but by forces older and harsher than memory. A faint murmur rippled through the crowd, a whisper, barely audible, yet packed with unrelenting dread. The talisman was a mark of binding, not just a summons, but a seal. To wear it was to claim allegiance, or perhaps to bear a curse. Outside, the mist thickened, swallowing the courtyard like a tide of forgotten days. Wooden beams creaked under the weight of unseen tension. Shadows, flickering like restless spirits, pressed close against the walls. The faint rattle of bamboo leaves fluttered against the night's breath, a mourner's dirge woven into the stillness. You trace the talisman's cold edge, a sudden shiver coursing down your spine. Somewhere deep, the flickering hope, kindled by the hearth's last embers, dimmed under the weight of what you now held. The firelight, once a soft cradle for quiet conversations and laughter, had given way to a solemn silence. A warning written not in words, but in the spaces between. As the courtyard seemed to fold into itself, the distant bell tolled again. This time, its mournful ring fractured, broken into irregular peals that echoed through the bamboo like a cracked mirror reflecting a fractured world. The rhythm was off, unsettling, a pulse out of sync with all familiar patterns. Eyes from behind the sliding screens, previously pools of calm and shadow, now flickered with sorrow, fear, and a spark of fierce determination. Faces familiar, worn by cycles of tradition, now lined with sudden resolve. A gentle wind stirred, weaving through the courtyard and lifting fragments of mist like spectral dancers caught in a silent song. You pulled your robe tighter, the fabric whispering like a secret across your skin. Then, barely above the breath of night, came a sound unlike the knocking from before, softer yet sharper. The faint scrape of nails against wood, deliberate and slow, almost a warning. It traced the length of the corridor behind you, rising then falling, a borrowed voice echoing just beyond the veil of privacy. You turned, heart pounding like a distant drum, to see the corridor swallowed by darkness, shadows twisting into unfamiliar shapes. Something moved there, too swift to fully capture, yet too deliberate to dismiss as mere trickery of light. The women behind you stiffened, exchanging glances thick with unspoken understanding. They whispered names you didn't recognize, old names tangled with danger and hope, their voices barely more than wind over fragile paper. The night hung heavily, as if poised on the cusp of revelation or ruin. And just as your gaze lost itself in the shadowed depths beyond the courtyard, a single lantern flickered violently, then snapped out, casting the entire tea house into darkness. Silence fell. Your breath caught, and somewhere beyond the veil of night, eyes gleamed with intention. The darkness seemed to breathe with you as the sudden snap of the lantern's flame vanished, plunging the tea house into a thick swallow of night. The faint mist outside curled through the courtyard like a ghost reluctant to leave, muffling the world in cold silence. You stood there, clutching the lacquered box and the metal talisman within, its weight an anchor, pulling you deeper into an unfolding shadow. The women around you, once a gentle current of whispered prayers and rustling silk, now shifted like leaves caught in a brittle wind. Their faces, faintly painted with ritual colors, carried a new edge, a hunger to confront what was rising beyond the fragile walls. Yet there was fear carved into their eyes, as if they'd glimpsed a storm too vast to outrun. The faint scrape echoed down the corridor again, slower this time, deliberate in its cruelty, like nails dragging against the grain of time itself. You turned with your breath caught, eyes scanning the dim corridor where dark shapes stirred just beyond your vision. Shadows intertwined and frayed, dancing with twisted familiarity, as if the night were playing a game no one should ever join. A sudden breeze slipped through a cracked window, carrying the sharp bite of wet earth and dry leaves crushed under unseen feet. The gardenias, once proud in their bloom, seemed to bow lower, folding petals inward like whispered secrets locked behind trembling screens. The scent hung fragile and haunted, half comfort and half farewell. Your fingers tightened reflexively around the talisman, cold against your skin. The inked characters seemed to writhe beneath your gaze, murmuring promises and threats in a language older than the walls that held you. Somewhere within that worn symbol, the fragile balance of this sheltered world teetered, a delicate thread fraying under invisible hands. One of the older women stepped softly beside you, her voice a mere breath. She whispered a name you dared not say aloud, a name threaded with dread and dark legend, as though uttering it could summon storms from forgotten depths. Her eyes, sharp beneath furrowed brows, glistened with unshed tears and fierce resolve. The courtyard lanterns flickered, casting their glow in stuttering pulses, shadows stretching and contracting like breath caught between two worlds. The earth beneath the wooden planks creaked faintly, a slow groan that stirred old fears woven into the bones of the place. The distant bell tolled once more, but the tone had fractured completely, a jagged cry tearing through the night's fragile veil. It sounded less like a call to prayer and more like an alarm, a mournful warning that rippled through the bamboo grove beyond, shivering the leaves in trembling unease. You took a hesitant step forward, your feet sinking softly into the cold wooden floor, and the weight of countless eyes pressed into your back. The women moved as one behind you, silken whispers trailing your form like a shadow's sigh. Their collective breath held tight as the corridor seemed to fold inward, swallowing sound and hope alike. From the depths of the bamboo grove came a movement, quick, fluid, a whisper of black fabric slipping through the mist, curling around the trees like smoke from a dark fire. You caught the faintest glint of eyes impossible to read, unblinking, fathomless, and utterly alien to the quiet humanity gathered here. Heart pounding, you glanced down at the talisman again. The metal's chill crept like ice along your veins, a silent frost enveloping your spine. The cold was no longer just there, night's breath, but something deeper. Something that seeped from legend into life. A cruel reminder that the sanctuary of tradition was no shield against what terror waits in shadows. A sudden snap startled the group. You turned sharply, just in time to see the edge of the sliding paper door tremble violently, pushed by an unseen force. The delicate paper stretched and tore with a sound like a shuddering sigh. One moment away from breaking the fragile barrier between stillness and chaos. The women gasped softly, half prayers falling from trembling lips. Their hands met in silent ritual, fingers clutching beads and talismans of their own, tiny lights against the encroaching dark. But even their fragile defenses seemed drowned beneath the oppressive hush that had settled like a shroud. The lantern closest to you guttered, the flame dancing wildly before bowing its head, breathing its last reluctant flicker. Shadows engulfed the courtyard, swallowing the gentle light that had been its fragile heart. And then, a final sound, a breath of movement soft and deliberate, brushing close as if the night itself had stepped into flesh. The edge of a dark cloak vanished around a corner, leaving only a whisper of vanished hope and silent questions that could not be answered. You stood frozen, every sense stretched taut like a bowstring about to snap. The talisman pulsed faintly against your palm, a heartbeat foreign, yet intimately tied to the fate unfolding. Outside, the distant temple bell offered one last fractured toll. It echoed, twisting through the bamboo like a wounded cry, mourning, warning, and promising that the story was no longer yours to hold alone. The night held its breath. The fragile door had cracked, and from beyond that fragile veil, eyes watched, waiting to write the next chapter in shadows yet unspoken. You stood frozen, the cold talisman weighing heavily in your palm, when a sudden shift in the courtyard's atmosphere made the hairs at the back of your neck rise. The mist curled and thickened, weaving through the wooden beams and lanterns, like slow-moving smoke, obscuring the edges of the familiar space you'd known only moments before. The flicker of the last guttering lantern cast long, quivering shadows that stretched like fingers toward the darkness creeping beneath the paper screens. The women's murmurs had grown quieter, a thread of tension winding through their breaths. A faint rustle reached your ears, not quite a step, not quite a whisper, a presence slipping between the bamboo stalks with unnatural silence. You turned sharply, your gaze skimming the hazy snake of darkness creeping through the courtyard's edge. There, among the trembling gardenias, a shadow shifted, too fluid to be caught by the weak lantern light. You swallowed, the cold night air pressing against your skin like a warning. The talisman pulsed against your skin, faintly as if alive. It drew a chill, not just from the night, but from an unseen force pressing closer, a weight no ritual could hold back. Around you, the silk kimonos rustled like dry leaves blown by a sudden wind, the women subtly retreating, their fingers clutching at prayer, beads, and worn charms. Their faces, framed by the fragile glow, carried a collective history of both hope and sleepless fear. Suddenly, a sharp snap. A paper door at the far corridor's end jerked violently, the fragile rice sheet tearing with a breathless shudder. The sound cracked the silence like a whispered scream, the barrier holding back that grave stillness, almost breaking. The women gasped softly, half prayers caught on trembling lips, as a thin breeze twined its cold fingers around the teahouse. The scent of charcoal and crushed herbs mixed with wet earth underfoot, a reminder of all that had been lost or left unsaid. You took a hesitant step forward, every creak of the wooden floorboards a protest beneath your weight. The distant temple bell tolled again, but its rhythm had broken completely. Jagged, uneven, a fractured psalm that rallied neither prayer nor calm. It felt more like a scream tossed into the bamboo grove, rattling the leaves in restless unease. Your heart beat louder, a steady drum in the heavy silence, as the edge of the courtyard seemed to fold inward. Shadows shifted and swayed, crowding the space like smoke curling in on itself. The talisman in your hand seemed to absorb that burden, growing colder, heavier, drawing your gaze repeatedly as if warning you of its dark promise. From the depths beyond, the faintest movement flickered at the corner of your vision, a slink of black fabric merging with the night, the glint of eyes impossible to read, leviathan pools reflecting no light, only a cold void. The presence was untethered to the teahouse's fragile order, a silent tide poised to engulf what little sanctuary had remained. A sudden whistle sliced through the air, a low, mournful note carried on the wind. You steadied your breath against the chill that was no longer just weather, but something reaching through centuries of ritual and silence. The women pressed closer, their whispers knitting a fragile shield of names and blessings. Old words, like talismans themselves, cast against the gathering darkness. Your fingers toyed absently with the edge of the talisman's metal, tracing its intricate lines, a map of power and curse, woven into delicate characters that felt too old to be safe. Somewhere deep inside, a thread unraveled, the careful balance of the teahouse's world, tipping toward irrevocable change. Then, the lantern, nearest to you, flickered violently, the flame tearing itself from life, as if struggling against an unseen breath. Shadows speared into the corners, swallowing the warm glow, casting the courtyard into an engulfing blackness. The scent of the gardenias, once delicate and sweet, transformed into something sharper, almost metallic, like iron traces in a river's flow. Your breath caught. The world contracted to that moment, suspended on a knife's edge. A soft, deliberate sound emerged from the darkness behind, the scraping of nails against wood. It was measured and cold, crawling along the length of the corridor, like a serpent weaving through bone. You turned in time to see the silhouette of the dark cloak vanish smoothly around the corner, leaving only the faintest ripple in the air, a disturbance impossible to ignore. The women's bodies stiffened, eyes flicked like moths caught in lamps. Names slipped again in whispers you didn't know, tethered to long-lost dangers and fragile hopes alike. The night held tight, thickening as if to stifle sound, breath, and movement. In that instant, your focus snapped back to the talisman, pulsing faintly against your palm, a heartbeat out of sync with the world's. Its coldness seeped into your blood, a silent herald of what waited just beyond the fragile veil of paper and shadow. Then, across the shrouded courtyard, the last lantern flared, bright, terrible, and before the flame could bow its head, it was extinguished violently, swallowed whole by the encroaching night. Silence reclaimed the teahouse. Your breath froze mid-inhale, and deep in that blackness, glinting like distant stars trapped in endless twilight, eyes watched, waiting for you to step forward into the unfolding story. The darkness clung tight, a velvet cloak pressed close against ragged wooden beams. As you stepped deeper into the courtyard's muted breath, the mist wrapped itself in lazy spirals around your ankles, wetting the hem of your robe with cold intent. Every step you took sent a faint creak through the aged planks beneath, a quiet echo swallowed almost immediately by the night's thick silence. The talisman's weight was a burning reminder against your palm, its metal chill a pulse out of rhythm with your own heartbeat. Around you, the women moved like shadows themselves, silken kimonos melding seamlessly with the gloom, faces chiseled in soft hues of anxiety and unyielding resolve. Their whispers were threads weaving through the dense air, names and ancient prayers slipping across lips, taught with Herculean effort to maintain calm. You caught a trace of incense on the breeze, faint, stubborn, fighting the chill that seeped into every corner. The gardenia bushes, which moments ago had seemed gentle sentinels, now bowed low, as if surrendering to the weight of unseen hands. Their petals, once tender white, dulled under mist and knife-edge winds, folding inward with a sorrow that felt almost human. The scent, normally soft and reassuring, now twisted with sharp notes, like something precious, tarnished. Your breath puffed softly, a fleeting cloud, caught and dissolved quickly in the frigid night. The courtyard closed around you, every measured eye lifted expectantly, every delicate movement a pact forged in silence. Somewhere past the bamboo grove, a lone dog's howl fractured the stillness, raw, distant, and restless, threading a knife through the fragile veil of calm. You stretched a hand outward, fingers brushing the cool stone surface of a nearby lantern. The flickering flame inside trembled violently, then wavered like a frightened bird. Its glow fractured in slow, jerking pulses before surrendering to the darkness altogether. The gardenia's ghostly outlines shuddered in the void left behind. Eyes turned toward the shadow-thick corridor that led back inside. A slow, deliberate scrape sliced through the air, nails tracing the grain of old wood, pulling a cold, brittle note that set nerves twitching. You spun just in time to catch a glimpse, a flash of black fabric slipping soundless into the folds of shadow, swallowing itself into the night. Like smoke vanishing up a cracked chimney, the women stiffened as one, breaths held tight like bowstrings on the verge of snapping. Whispers tangled with old names, long buried, yet alive with trembling urgency. The air convulsed with the unspoken promise of something lurking just beyond sight, a presence at once alien and inevitable. Your gaze flicked back to the talisman. Against your palm, it pulsed faintly, an unsteady heartbeat, cold and sharp as broken glass. Its engraved lines seemed to twist, alive with whispered threats and forgotten power. You felt the slow undoing of whatever fragile normalcy the tea house had once cradled, now slipping like sand through the fingers of a trembling hand. The distant temple bell clanged again, but this time not with serene grace. Its mournful ringing fractured into jagged, uneven peals, cutting through the bamboo grove like shards of shattered glass. The bell's sound no longer soothed, but sliced open the night's fragile veil with a cry that felt like a warning and a lament. You took a cautious step forward. The wooden floorboards moaned beneath your weight, a slow protest to your advancing uncertainty. The gathered women flanked you, their silk brushing like dry leaves, their murmurs dwindling to solemn silence. The courtyard felt compressed now, collapsing inward, as if the very night pressed down on your shoulders. Suddenly, a thin flash, movement in the peripheral gloom, caught your eye again. The one who slipped through the shadows returned, poised like a specter no one dared claim. Eyes, pitch black and fathomless, reflected no light, but burned with a strange sentience, a cold force indifferent to human hopes or fears. From the depths of the mist, a low whistle rose, mournful and drawn out, threading through the bamboo stalks like a lament from some lost soul. You sucked in a breath, steadying the unnatural chill curling its fingers inside your chest. The women gathered tighter, aligning their whispered words and beads, as if a fragile shield could hold back the gathering darkness. Your fingers grazed the talisman's edge again, the cold biting deeper, the weight of unspoken bonds and curses pressing down like an invisible vice. Somewhere deep inside, a pulse shuddered, an awakening of tides that shouldn't be disturbed. The world you knew was unraveling, thread by delicate thread. The nearest lantern flickered violently, the flame writhing as if caught in silent agony, before it was swallowed whole by enveloping blackness. The courtyard plunged into night, the gardenia's once sweet scent, now only a ghostly memory. Then came the sound you had feared, a slow, deliberate scrape along the corridor's wooden frame, nails dragging like the whisper of death creeping closer. You turned sharply, pulse quickening, to see the dark cloak vanish around a corner with impossible stealth, leaving only a wavering ripple that distorted the shadows behind it. The women held their ground, eyes sparking with flickers of both dread and fierce determination. Names danced in their soft murmurs, ancient words tied to fragile hopes, and ancient dangers long buried, but never forgotten. The night pressed closer, the air thickening, until every breath felt like threading a needle. Your hand tightened around the talisman, its cold pulse now a storm beneath your skin. The fragile balance of the tea house had cracked beyond repair. Then, cutting through the suffocating silence, a sudden flare. The last lantern flared, bright and terrible for a heartbeat, before being snuffed out violently. Darkness swallowed everything whole. Your breath caught sharply, time skewed, and somewhere in the unyielding blackness, Beyond the shattered light, eyes gleamed, patient, unblinking, and raw with silent intent. The night waited, and so did you. The night had pulled its veil tight around the teahouse, shadows swallowing every flicker of light, every tentative whisper. The final lantern's inexplicable death left the courtyard submerged in darkness, so complete it felt like a silence born not just from the absence of sound, but from the thick weight of a story ceasing to struggle. But that was not the end. Not truly. You stood rooted where the blackness closed in, the cold metal talisman heavy and pulsing faintly against your palm, its chill seeping deeper than mere night air. In that moment, the tension that had gripped every heart seemed to waver, stretched thin like a fragile silk thread ready to snap, but somehow held steady. Slowly, the first breath of dawn began to touch the edges of the sky, pale and reluctant, as if tiptoeing through the mist that still clung to the gardenia bushes. Their once bowed petals lifted slightly, catching the faintest light and returning it with a tremulous shimmer. The sharp bite in the air softened, coaxed into something less relentless. Around you, the women drew closer, their whispered prayers fading into a hush that was neither fear nor despair, but an acceptance, a quiet resolve to meet whatever path lay ahead. Faces once tight with worry now softened with gentle nods, as if in shared understanding that the fragile peace of the teahouse was no longer fragile at all, but transformed. You stepped forward, the worn wooden floor beneath your feet warm from the night's retreating cold. The once ominous corridor opened up in the gentle morning light, the torn rice paper glinting with early dew, a delicate fracture mended by time and patience. Sliding doors that had once trembled now stood peacefully ajar, inviting rather than shutting away. The faintest sound stirred, the soft clack of Geta sandals breaking the stillness, rhythmic and steady. A new metronome marking a rebirth rather than a dirge. The women moved with graceful purpose, their silk sleeves brushing quietly in gentle motion, weaving a tapestry of calm around the courtyard. You unfolded the scroll once more, tracing the ancient characters that had at first seemed but summons to doom. But now, in this quiet light, they revealed something else, an unspoken promise of continuation. The assembly it called was not of fear or control, but of unity, binding the past and future, shadow and light, in a fragile dance renewed. Deep in your chest, the pulse of the talisman slowed, the cold metallic weight becoming a warm anchor to the present moment. It was no curse, but a reminder, a symbol of endurance and connection forged through whispered secrets and steady breath. Beyond the courtyard, the gardenias exhaled their subtle perfume, rich and soft, carrying hints of hope entwined with memory. The charcoal smoke faded like a distant dream, replaced by fresh earth rising through the mist. You inhaled deeply, letting that complex calm settle around your skin and bones, an ancient ritual of peace, born not from denial of darkness, but from its quiet transcendence. The distant temple bell tolled again, but this time its mournful cry unfolded into a steady, reassuring rhythm, a pulse inviting rather than warning. It flowed through the bamboo grove like a gentle current, stitching together the rustling leaves, the cool night's breath now warmed by the sun's rise. Eyes once wide with unspoken fear now met yours with a soft brightness. The young maid who had offered the hollow smile the night before now rested a genuine one upon your gaze, fleeting, fragile, but real. The hearth's ember, long thought extinguished, kindled quietly in the common room, its glow a modest blaze against the gathering light. You sank onto the thin futon once again, the firmness now a gentle reassurance rather than a pressing burden. Wrapped in the soft rustle of silk and the steady presence of those around you, the room exhaled with you, breathing out tension and welcoming in the calm. Outside, the gardenias stirred in the breeze, petals unfolding like soft hands reaching for new days. The narrow corridor, once a ribbon of stillness and silence, warmed with the faint shuffle of footsteps, the careful opening of sliding doors, and the patient pulse of life resuming its course. Night's watchful eyes retreated, replaced by a horizon brushed with the promise of morning. The story, like the twilight folding into dawn, had found its close, not with a sudden thunderclap, but in the gentle settling of a long-held breath, finally released. And as your lids grew heavy, the quiet of the tea-house wrapped around you like a well-worn blanket, familiar and forgiving. The weight of the talisman rested softly beside you, a silent guardian of the tale now told. With one last deep inhale of the mingled scents of gardenia, incense, and fresh earth, your senses drifted, tethered to the comforting cadence of slow, even breathing. The night was done, the story at peace, and now so were you.